and the Soviet Union. So, do any of you know anything about the Soviet Union or Sparta as of right now?
You should try using the red one. But Sparta was old. Yeah.
Sparta is old.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty old. It's about, what, a couple thousand years old, 2,000 or so years old?
It's like something like that.
Yeah, Sparta actually was a nation of Greece, a city-state of Greece, I should say. At that point in time, Greece was made up of only city-states. So Sparta and Athens you can think of as completely different countries. In comparison to today, we have basically countries as a whole, like the United States is a country compared to Europe, which is basically a conglomeration of countries. But for today, we are learning about Sparta and the Soviet Union and how it relates to today. How something kind of old and something sort of in the past relates even right now. So, my question for you guys is, let's see, what do you know about the Soviet Union, first off?
Communism.
Communists? Okay.
Lenin.
So, communists.
World War II. Dang, all these markers suck.
Let's do Cold War. Yeah, what's going on with these markers? Sabotaging me. Cold War. And what we know about the past from, well, his name was Thucydides, but we know about Sparta and Athens having the big war called Peloponnesian War. Not even gonna try and spell that out. And these two wars are actually very important. From what we know, the Peloponnesian War was a war based on containing Athens, right? The funny thing about this is that Athens supported democracy, whereas the Soviet Union supported communism. Athens was the one expanding here, and in the Cold War, the communists were the one expanding. So, Democrats expanding versus the communists expanding. Like, how does that sort of make you feel? How does that that's a good question to ask here. So we have these two things. This happened around, I think the 5th century BCE, and this happened within the past 25 years, right? And they're basically almost the same war, fought for the same sort of reasons, for containing democracy and for containing communism, right? Communism was expanding. Sparta and Sparta's allies were concerned about this expansion, and so they went to war. On the other hand, the United States went to war with the Soviet Union in order to contain communism. That's actually true. I don't know which. Do you have a question?
They never really went to war.
What do you mean? Well, it's a Cold War,
So
right?
The war was really.
Like, it's not the Vietnam War, I guess you can claim, is a part of the Cold War because it was for containment of communism. The Cold War basically was, basically it's just, I don't know. Anyway, if you have a question, ask me after class and let me know. Anyway. The United States was absolutely, or any democratic country was afraid that the Soviet Union was going to expand. Especially when, during the Cold War, the Russians had an agreement with Cuba to basically send their missile arms to Cuba so that they could be closer to the United States. The reason why it is called the Cold War is because not a lot happened in terms of actually fighting, whereas the Peloponnesian War, there was quite a bit of fighting between Sparta and Athens, except Athens didn't necessarily fight so much as they just kind of hunkered down and waited for Sparta to kind of do its thing and, tire itself out. What Sparta needed was an absolute victory against Athens. So basically, Sparta needed Athens to give up its entire empire. Very expansive empire. But yeah, so we have these two, right, that are sort of, the Soviet Union was basically for preserving the state. That's what it was, it's what its mantra was. You had babies, they went to work, but they weren't working for themselves. They were working for the betterment of the state. Well, this idea applies to Sparta as well. Sparta, basically, when you were born, they looked at you and decided whether or not you could make anything for the state. They basically exposed any babies that they thought wouldn't be fit later on to support the state. And so when you think about this, Sparta, somewhat the Soviet Union of ancient Greece. I've already made that comparison with the Peloponnesian War and the Cold War and how that compares. My next question, though, is what countries today do you think have very similar ideas to Sparta and the Soviet Union in terms of communism, or in terms of, making, basically you work for the betterment of the state, of the governmental body?
North Korea.
North Korea? That's a good idea. North Korea. I mean, it is basically the last vestige of communism in the modern world. I guess you could consider China communist as well, but they're more, isn't it like
open, because they have a market economy.
right, what is it called? I'm blanking on it. It's technical communism with like a republic twist. They have a
Yeah,
president.
they're communism, but their economy is not communist.
Okay, it's not based on that.
Not based on
Okay.
communism.
So North Korea is the last vestige of what we know as actual traditional communism. And so what we see with this contentions between with Sparta and Athens and the Soviet Union and the United States, what could we see today between North Korea and whoever else? United States, maybe? I mean, there are dialogues between the government of the United States and North Korea that haven't really been that great, right? We know that Trump has said a lot of bad things about North Korea, sort of escalating things a little bit towards a bad outcome, basically. But for the most part, what we know, Korea is the last vestige of communism in the modern world. And so what I want you guys to think about is how history is sort of connected. History, even though today may seem sort of like a distinct time in our lives, it's actually very similar to other times in our past. So let's make some predictions. What do you think could happen in the future? Based off of what we know about the past, what do you think?
One won't. I'm gonna say one won't exist anymore, I guess.
One won't exist? What do you mean?
I don't know. Huh?
North Korea will just diminish, kind of
Like
Soviet Union, because they were just so cut off from the rest of the world with resources and everything.
Okay, my next question is why do you think North Korea has surpassed the Soviet Union in terms of North Korea and communism and its age? I mean,
Well, North Korea is a result of
yeah, communism of the USSR.
USSR
Yeah.
directly.
Exactly. But what I'm saying is, why has it lasted till 2018? Why hasn't it died out like the USSR did?
Because it's just because USSR during the time, they had to support all these other communist states. But when North Korea is just by itself, they're only supporting themselves rather than all these other communist states. So they only need the resources to support themselves, while USSR had to pull together all the resources to support themselves and all these other communist countries.
So you're basically saying that since it's isolated is the reason why it's
Yeah.
kind of lasted to today. So how do you think this dialogue with North Korea affects you here in Lincoln right now?
Affects
Like-
me.
Like, what do you think? What do you, not necessarily what are your fears for the future with the dialogues that are going on right now between our government and North Korea?
Fear that there's going to be a war eventually, and we quite possibly just can't afford a war, really.
Yeah.
Not really too worried about it, to be honest, because I feel like if it did happen, like, I don't know, we have a lot of allies against North Korea, so I feel like North Korea would never even step those boundaries because they would have the whole world on them, pretty much,
Sure.
for the most part. So I think it's just kind of one of those, like, Cold War, like, we're just going to keep flexing our muscles, but, like, nothing's really going to happen.
Yeah. Another really interesting thing about North Korea is we are technically still at war with them. Except it's been like a ceasefire for the past, 60 years now?
Yeah, something like that.
But that's why they have the weird marches on the, what is it, the
38.
parallel? 38th parallel? And like how neither side can cross the line and, there's just a lot of tension there. But anyway, so do you guys have any questions for me so far? What do you think about history repeating itself, or the connections of history, like where we see certain things kind of lapsing over into today even, or like modern? This is a pretty recent idea. This is just before our lifetime. The Soviet Union fell in 1991, and so I mean that's not too far off from us being alive. So that's kind of, something to consider when we think about, Sparta existed 2,000 years ago, and, it existed as, like, I don't want to necessarily say it was communism before communism, but it had the same ideas. So, I mean, sort of more modern, and this is right now, this is in the present. So I think this is just a vestige of communism, but do you guys think there could be any sort of other countries like this, any other nations that will pop up in the future that are kind of like this, or?
Well, I'm not really too worried about it, to be honest, because it's a very hard thing to do nowadays, especially when it's basically just by yourself. It was easier back then because you had the USSR support in all these new communist countries, but now there's no big world power, big world power to support these places, so I feel like it's a lot harder.
Right. Okay. Well, that sort of wraps it up for my lecture. For right now, though, I do have Google Forms essay that I would like you guys to work on for the last 10 minutes of class. I don't know if you can submit from the email.
I think you can, to
You
be
can?
honest. I think so.
Okay. Well, if you can take a little bit to kind of read over the questions, there are a few videos that I posted as well to kind of help you guys also understand the two ideas that we talked about today. One is a crash course video on the Cold War, and the other one's, I think, a history channel biography or something like that, not documentary, on the two contentions between the Soviet Union and the United States and Sparta against Athens. So if you guys will take a little bit, don't watch the full video, but definitely kind of glimpse over it, and then write 5 sentences, take 10 minutes, and just kind of fill this thing out and submit it, if you will.